Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Brandon, and welcome back to Marotta Media. Well, it's officially time for my first review of 2022. January was a pretty sparse month in terms of movie choices. The only real movie that I was interested in seeing this month is the movie that I will be talking about in today's video. Scream. This Scream film is the fifth entry in the Scream franchise. Now, in preparation for this movie, I watched all four of the previous Scream movies because, honestly, I had never seen them before. And I know that may be hard to believe because the original Scream is considered to be one of the greatest horror movies of all time. I actually watched that movie around Halloween a few months ago for the first time, and I thought it was really good. It was very funny, and I loved the commentary on the horror genre alone, but at the same time, it's also a very interesting whodunit. Now, even though the first movie is far and away the best one, the next three were all pretty solid too. I definitely think that the third movie is the weakest, but I mean, it's still very entertaining. But this version of Scream, or Scream 5 if you want to get technical, I mean, they could have just called it Scream 5, but whatever, Scream 2022. But this movie takes place 25 years after the original, but we return to the town of Woodsboro where yet another Ghostface killer has emerged. We're introduced to several new characters as well as previous characters such as Neve Campbell's Sidney, David Arquette's Dewey, and Courtney Cox's Gale. But like I mentioned, this month's choice of movies was very scarce. And I was nervous because most movies that come out in January are kind of just thrown in there and left to die. But even then, I was confused why they chose to release this movie in January. I mean, this is a perfect Halloween release. But thankfully, Scream did not fall into that category, because this movie continues the greatness of this franchise, and I think it might be right behind the original. And like the previous Scream movies, this film begins with someone who is home alone and they receive a phone call from Ghostface. And it's so strange to me, because even though I believe every movie starts that way, the formula never really feels stale. It doesn't feel like they're recycling the same idea over and over again. It feels almost like an homage. Now that may be strange because if that was the case, it would be paying tribute to itself, but it always feels fresh with each movie. But the girl at the beginning of this scene is Tara, played by Jenna Ortega, and she does a remarkable job in this scene. And they have that same conversation. They start with small talk. It slowly devolves into what's your favorite scary movie. But one thing that I like here is that the character of Tara mentions modern horror movies as her favorite. Two movies she mentions are Hereditary and The Babadook. And typically, I don't really like when movies or television shows date themselves, but I'm willing to forgive it here because in this entire series, this question is asked and they mention movies that were popular at the time. And even though that does date it, it also shows how much horror has changed over the years and how people view it. Because in this movie, Tara gives a very well thought out, articulate thoughts about the Babadook and how it's a commentary on the burden of motherhood. But then, like all the other scenes in the past, it escalates and she is attacked by Ghostface. And a prime example of how much horror has changed over the years is showcased perfectly right in this opening scene. And it's evident in its violence, because this is definitely probably the bloodiest and most gruesome Scream movie yet. Several of the death scenes made me squirm because the characters die like very slow, painful deaths. I won't get into spoilers, but there is one character that is slowly stabbed in the throat with Ghostface knife. And in that moment, I just kind of grabbed my neck and just rubbed it and, covered it because, I don't know, it just felt like I was getting stabbed with this character. But aside from that, what's made all the Scream movies great is the humor and just the refusal to take themselves too seriously. And each movie has done that with its commentary on the horror genre itself. Like, there is one scene in particular where all the main characters of the movie come together to discuss who they think the killer might be. And the humor in this moment is so meta that the fourth wall is practically non-existent. It feels almost as if we're being spoken to directly as an audience. But like I previously mentioned, a lot of the characters in this movie are brand new, and this is the first time that they've ever appeared. But I think Scream made a very smart decision by making these characters connected to previous characters. Two of the characters are brother and sister, and their uncle is Randy, who was played by Jamie Kennedy, who died in Scream 2. Another character is the son of Deputy Hicks, who was previously in Scream 4. And without getting into spoilers, there is another character who is somehow related to one of the previous killers. Now, even though I thought this was a smart decision, this was also definitely the biggest complaint I had with the movie. While I do find most of the new characters interesting, I feel that they're mostly interesting due to their relation to previous characters, and they're not really interesting on their own. It's almost as if the writers were a little bit too concerned with making their interest level as interesting as their relatives from the previous films. But that did not kill my empathy for these characters, because I really did start to like them and care about them. And something else that I did not quite jive with was, it felt like the previous characters such as Sydney, Gale, and Dewey weren't as utilized as they could have been. Now don't get me wrong, I fully understand why they did that, because I think it's a great choice. But I think that they can pay tribute to the past while also connecting it to the present in a more interesting way. But one thing this movie did that I absolutely loved was its tribute to the late great Wes Craven. Craven was the director of the 4 previous movies. He also directed horror classics like A Nightmare on Elm Street, as well as The Hills Have Eyes. And he passed away a few years ago, so obviously this is the first Scream movie that was made without him. And this movie pays tribute to him in like the most horror movie way possible, and it was just so well done. It was very silly, but it was also very beautiful in its own way. But overall, guys, this new Scream movie was pretty solid and a fantastic January release. Granted, that's not saying much, but it's still really good. If you're a fan of horror or just the Scream franchise as a whole, then definitely check this one out, because I'll probably be watching it again. And overall, I'm gonna give Scream an 8 out of 10. Hey everybody, thank you so much for watching my review of Scream 2022. If you guys saw this movie, then let me know what you thought about it. Did you like it? Did you hate it? And where would you rank the Scream movies from 1 to 5? Because I think that they're all pretty solid films. If you guys like this review, then be sure to hit that thumbs up, and do not forget to subscribe. If you want to see my previous reviews, then I'll link those right over here. Other than that, hope you all have a tremendous rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.